Hello Internet, and today's video is going to be another book opinion. Those videos in which I tell you my opinion on a book, and today's book is going to be The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I'm going to preface this. I have read the second book, Obelisk Gate, so be aware that when I'm making this video, I have continued with this series. Now, I feel like this is going to be a book that people either really love or really just can't get into, and I was sort of on the fence. I didn't quite get into the meat of this book until later on because there were two things that kind of confused me. So I'm going to give you my little summary so that you really understand what's going on in this book, and then something you probably should be aware of before going in so that you are not highly confused. So this book is about a woman called Asun. She comes home to find that her son is dead, murdered by her husband, and her husband has also kidnapped her daughter. She goes off to try to find her daughter and find her husband so she can get her daughter back. We live in this epic fantasy world in which there are two races of humans. There are just your average like muggle humans, and then there are special subspecies of humans that have powers. These are referred to as origin. Origin have a sort of elemental, they're attached to the earth sort of power. They can control the earth, like ice things over, like they just have some sort of pull to the earth that they can control it and manipulate it to their will. Now, this is across the board. All origins have the same ability, right? So they are human, however, they also have like this extra talent that comes naturally to them. In this world, origins are oppressed and used sort of as slaves. They are not seen as humans. They are not seen as equals at all. Now, the reason why origins are so important in this world is because there is a thing called the fifth season. So like how we have seasons where it rains or when it's cold, the fifth season is basically when the earth is trying to destroy everyone. So you get massive tsunamis, you get like animals turning and acting unnatural, you get droughts that go on for years. So the seasons last for anywhere from like a couple months to a couple years. And this is basically where the earth is trying to kill everyone. Like it wants to destroy everyone. So the origin usually exist so that they can help prepare the world for when the next season comes because of their control over it. Now, they have been oppressed, and Asun is an origin, and that's why her son was murdered by her husband, because he found out about her dark secret. Now, this whole story follows Asun. Now, Asun's story is told in second person. This is a little different from Tiger's Daughter, in which you referred to the other girl in this book. In this case, M.K. Jemisin uses you to refer to you, the reader. So she is trying to make you Asun. You're supposed to be Asun. She's literally placing you in Asun's shoes instead of like in movies like The Matrix where you can basically project yourself on the main character. M.K. Jemisin is actually telling you, you are Asun, this is what you're feeling, this is what's happening to you. Be aware of like how horrible this is. Now, here's where it gets a little confusing and where I think a lot of people can get lost and it can kind of stray away. Now, other than Asun's chapters, which are told in second person, there are also other chapters told in third person. So these chapters cover a young girl named Amaya and a woman named Cyanide. These are backstory, okay? I was confused when reading this. I spaced out like once or twice because I was reading it while I was doing something, and I wasn't listening and paying attention to the book. So I was always kind of confused because I didn't know if you was like current day, this is what happening, and third person was also current day, but because it wasn't like the main character, it was in third person, because you know, sometimes authors do that. Sometimes they'll tell one perspective in first person and one perspective in third person, but those both perspectives will be happening at the same time. Currently, I'm reading like The Crown of Wishes, and it does that, where the female character is told in first person, but the male character is told in third person. So like, that's kind of what I was thinking. I was like, oh, are these happening at the same time? They are not. Demaya's story and Cyanide's story, they are backstories. I'm not wanting to spoil it, but just be very aware that they are backstories to kind of explain why Asun is in the situation she is. So second person, current day. Third person, in the case of this first book, is not current day. It is backstory, so you understand the world you're living in, the society, why everything is the way it is. Now into how I think about this book, how I feel about this book. I will give this book a 4 stars because I do think it is a really lovely story. I would have liked a better explanation for the second person and the third person and how they relate, because a lot of the time I just spent a great brunt of the book just thinking, are these all happening at the same time, or are is this happening and then this the backstory of that and that the backstory of that? Turns out once I got a little bit more into it and I was pretty sure what parts were backstory to what other parts, I enjoyed it a whole lot more because I was no longer confused trying to fit pieces together. Another thing that you probably should know and that I really liked, this is a very character-driven book, and a lot does happen, but it doesn't seem like it at first glance. You're never bored or anything. But since it's so very character driven and you learning about the world, you getting in touch with the characters and why they feel that way, if that is not something that you like as the focus and really being the plot of your story, then I would say be wary of this book, because this book relies heavily on the characters and their backstory for there to be a plot to go off of. It's very, very well done. The basic plot is just Asun trying to figure out what happened and where her daughter is, but most of the story is told through her traveling or the backstories and what is happening to these 2 other girls and women. So it's just something that's very character driven. If you like that, you'll like this. I love character driven stories. I get attached to characters. If you have good characters, I like your story. It's as simple as that. And I think this is one of those books you go in, you fall in love with the characters. I would warn you, I don't think you can space out on this book. This is very heavy, right? There's a lot of information in this book. Now, while I don't think the author does telling versus showing, I think she handles all of this information really well to really flush out this picture of this world and these people and their conflicts. I do think it's something you have to pay really close attention to while reading and not space out while doing other things. Otherwise, you might not be able to keep up with where the story is going. I survived and I did pretty good, but at the same time, just don't space out because you might be a little lost and you might not end up enjoying it. For me, this book didn't really get good until the last portion where everything was sort of clicked together and everything was putting together, and my confusion in trying to figure out how these perspectives related to each other was left behind. This series does improve, in my opinion. I do like the obelisk a whole lot better because I already kind of I'm no longer confused. So if you can get past maybe initial confusion and then read the book, you'll definitely love this book. So I hope when you go into this book, I hope if you like high fantasy, you'll like this book. This book is not sci-fi, however it does have sci-fi elements. It has its own version of sci-fi in this book, but this does count as fantasy. So if you like high fantasy, if you like highly character-driven books, if you like interesting perspectives, if you like interesting ways of stories, if you really like when authors invest time into your characters and your world, really fleshing this out, give this book a shot. However, be very aware of how everything relates to each other and be sure to pay attention, because this is one of those books that you might end up not enjoying or not really getting the hang of if you're either not paying attention or you're not quite sure how the point of views relate to each other until halfway through the book, and then you're oh, that makes so much more sense. Why didn't I get it in the first place? I don't know. I would say read the 5th season if this sounds like your thing. I am aware that certain people just won't like this book, but if it sounds like your thing, you'll love this book. This will be a really great book for you and you'll be invested. So those are all my thoughts on the 5th season. If you like what you're seeing here and you want to continue to see more, click on those buttons down below, and goodbye, Internet.